And we are live. Welcome to another session of Unscripted, and I have the great pleasure to introduce Danny Dimoski. Thank you very much for joining me today. How are you?
Thank you. Pretty good, not too bad.
So I love having cybersecurity professionals on the show today, and I very much appreciate you joining because it allows for folks in the industry to get a glimpse of career path, trial and tribulations of people that went into security. And so why don't we start with that before we jump into some of the more difficult conversation. We'll clean our palettes with walk me through memory lane. Like, how did you get into this industry? What have you done? And how do you got into where you are today?
Yeah, sure. I started my career building out computers when I was 11 years old, 11, 12. My first job out of like high school was Circuit City, Fire Dogs, Tech Squad, which was pretty much my start to my computer building career and tech support. Circuit City collapsed and they bankrupt, and then I went to Best Buy. Best Buy was my next thing to basically from a perspective of support. So I went through college to NJIT and Insurance Technology right after high school, majored in cybersecurity, got my master's in information security, administration security. So from right off the bat, I was doing more network support, network engineering, but I always wanted to go into security. I enjoyed the whole side of hacking and pen testing and seeing these breaches happen around the world and occur in the news. I started basically learning Kali Linux. At the time, Kali was backtrack, learning how to run scans using Metasploit, and then using a VM called Metasplitable, practicing my pen testing skills. From there, I got my first job right out of college with the DoD, Department of Defense, the Army, mostly working on vehicle projects, building out small networks, but making sure those networks are secure, specifically with the SIPRnet, NIPRNet classified, unclassified networks. So that's pretty much my start, and then progressing from there, I stayed there about roughly three and a half years. I came back. I actually moved to the DC area at the time. Then I moved back to New Jersey after roughly 3.5 years. I got offered an opportunity in the financial district, financial industry. Obviously, with government work, you don't really get rich. So I wanted to make some more money. I was offered an opportunity with consulting back in New York City to start doing more security work. Initial job right when I came back here, I was doing more network security engineering, building out networks, firewalls, routers, switches, and then applying the security elements of the tools like Tanium, sub-DLP, whatever was necessary at the company. Last 10 years, I've also started teaching. I teach network defense, cybersecurity controls at Pace University in New York City. So a lot of the work I do entails my experience applying it and teaching others how to basically run scans, pen test, and then secure networks, right? So the current role right now, I am in cyber operations, doing a lot more defensive operations, stopping the hackers from getting in to the network, trying to basically also improve networks at the same time, secure whatever's necessary when there's a flaw or a problem. So that's really how I got
it is cool. So Danny, if you don't mind, let's double click on a couple things. First and foremost, what attracted you in the early days to computers and just this whole technical aspect of it, and what specifically do you like about it? And then talk to me about the early days. So you wanted to deal with computers, but then you went into Circuit City, and it's an iconic. I love it. It's really iconic. There's a lot of people that started at Circuit City. You'd be surprised.
Correct, yeah.
It's not the first I've heard that. Talk to me about that kind of the experience of kind of having hands-on experience as a kid, and what were the things you really enjoyed, and what attracted you to this profession?
Yeah, so one of the first computers that my parents got was a compact Windows 98 computer. So I didn't really know how to use it, and it was dial-up internet, dial-up AOL, American Online, and I learned. I was always interested in like getting basically free internet, and my perspective was like, how can I get free internet? Maybe make this dial-up modem dial to a different number and connect somehow. But then when I got my first job in high school doing tech support, right, I was always interested. Even as a kid, I have pictures of my parents like with screwdrivers in my hand trying to fix stuff. And as a little kid, and
Danny, fix
so
stuff or break stuff?
both, a little bit of both. Yeah, I think break stuff, and then my mentality was to fix it. I was fixing as a kid. So with this Windows 98 computer, I think initially we started having some issues with it, and I think one of the graphics cards was going bad on it, and I remember my father at the time calling tech support, Comcast, HP, trying to basically figure out what's going on. They didn't install drivers, and I started getting this mentality of, "Oh, this is not too hard. I can just install a driver, fix a problem." And then that's where I progressively learned because we were forced to reimage them, install the operating system, install drivers, and then I started basically learning more about software installations. And progressively, when I got to Best Buy, I learned basically how to put the computer together in a way, buy parts. A lot of times people come there with some issues, hardware issues, software issues. So that support mentality, helping them fix their problems. And Best Buy, Circuit City at the time, they didn't really have like tech support. It was just Circuit City tech support. But they bought this company called FireDog, which kind of bought in more like tools and more training to us, which was cool. Which kind of pretty much progressed my support and my computer skills a little more. I was there for roughly, I think, 3.5 years, 4 years, and then they bankrupt, start closing down a lot of the areas, stores, and then I got offered the opportunity to work at Best Buy, but that was I think like a year and a half. So roughly throughout high school, college, and then I was midway through college, and I graduated towards the end.
And you took a formal education. Why did you pursue that? Why did you think it was important to? You had some experience. You could have continued that path, but then you decided to venture and pursue formal education in IT and cybersecurity specifically.
Yeah, so my parents, I come from a big Macedonian background, Eastern European. My parents' always mentality was, because I'm a first generation American. Mentality was, hey, be a doctor, be something like, go to college. And I wasn't really interested in being a doctor. I was more interested in more of like my niches, like playing around with toys as a kid, and playing around with the radio and playing around with the VCR, right? And computers were like my next interest. And I didn't go to NJIT right away. I went to a 2-year college. I signed up for computer and networking classes, and then it's a community college, so I ended up transferring from Bergen Community College to NJIT roughly a year and a half later into the information technology, information security program at NJIT. It's New Jersey Technology.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was more of the pursuit of my parents pushing me to get a 4-year degree, which ended up being a 5-year with a master's, a 5-year degree, which was, I think, more of them pursuing it than more of just having a plan. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where to go. I think that was my only option, and then it was pretty much the option that was the most interesting, because initially I started taking some Cisco classes. They have a Cisco lab there, router switches, and then I started doing some forensics courses. So it was a little built, the whole program's built out. Graduate there and pretty much continue with the hands-on knowledge. It's a very hands-on program. It caught my eye and to continue with it.
And do you find what's more important, formal education, formal training, or hands-on training? And you have both, which is
Yeah.
best of both worlds. And some people would say that the role of traditional education is starting to diminish. Companies want more hands-on, and sometimes
Yeah.
it's vice versa, depending on what organization you're looking for.
Yeah. Your normal like tech schools or trade schools, right? You can go into a trade school and get the hands-on training right away without the formal training. What I'm seeing now in the industry is definitely a lot more hands-on, specifically in the cyber security engineering realm, right? Everything's on hands-on. Everything you have to do it, uh, and it's all about the hands-on training that you get in order to apply your knowledge. Obviously, once you start going up the tier from past like security engineering, maybe becoming like a director, I think you're kind of stepping back into the more theoretical realm where you need those classes from like business management and economics and in the basic kind of formal training. That's where I think it's necessary. I think the hands-on training is very important, and I think it's where I see candidates and employees are specifically in computer and security operations or cyber operations. There's a lot more requirement to be hands-on now. I think now with AWS being bigger and companies moving to AWS, I think there's just a lot more hands-on work that's being done. But the formal training, I think, is just gives people opportunity maybe for career growth in the long run when they want to go up the chain to become a director or a managing director.
Yeah, absolutely. And specifically, you transition from, I would say, consumer breaks fix to it's really interesting, break fix to corporate America. And then from a individual contributor, you move to some management roles. Walk me through that process, because these are all, in my mind, yes, there's some overlapping skill set, but then there's additional skill set that needs to be required. And a lot of time is on the job training, OJT kind of thing, where you don't go through formal education for that, but you
Correct.
have a hands-on experience, and you make mistake as you go, or you walk me through that process of how you transitioned.
Yeah, so the first as I mentioned, the first job right out of college at the DoD, I was part of a lab where we were building out these small networks in order to deploy them into the vehicle military networks. So some of the process there, when I first got offered the opportunity, they sent me for training to multiple different military bases that were involved in this project. It was a swap size, weight, power project where you're reducing the size of the weight, but you're creating a really powerful network. So, the initial, I think, project that the initial training I went through was
and Danny,
part
like,
of the,
if you don't mind, I will just want to expand on that, because a lot of people don't realize that when you're joining DoD, the military,
yeah,
you have the ability to very quickly have unbelievable experience that
yeah,
most people in the civilian life, in the kind of enterprise and private sector, don't get. You can be
correct,
like 25 years old and deal with a massive network of
yeah,
millions and millions of nodes that are worth who knows how much, and have critical meaning to the infrastructure and the security of this nation. And it's quite incredible how quickly can you have this type of
yeah,
experience. And people don't realize yeah, you might not get rich, but
correct, yeah,
it's an invaluable experience.
very
So
hands-on, yeah. Yeah, it's a very hands-on approach to what their training is, and which kind of prepared me for, even though I didn't continue my career in
yeah,
government, right?
and intensity
Corporate
as well,
America,
right, Danny?
same element, right? Same networks, not same networks, but
Yeah,
similar networks.
Yeah, and the
Uh,
intensity of it as well, Danny. Depending where you are, you might all of a sudden have, 12-hour days, which you're all you do is, so it's not the 9 to 5. You might have a 12-hour day, sometimes even longer, where all you do is live and breathe these technical terms and technical hands-on
mhm,
experience.
yeah. Yeah, so I think when the initial kind of they threw me into the fire concept, there's a lot of training involved, right? So between like being in Maryland, I got sent to Detroit, I got sent to Georgia with the Air Force, a lot of training, mostly lab work, right? A lot of lab work for the first 6, 7 months, where I was learning the DoD kind of buzzwords, but also applying some of their policies and understanding what it entails to be part of a network there, right? So how to deploy a network, how to implement, how to provide that security element, and then also understanding what classified networks were and unclassified networks. So even though I was part of a vehicle kind of integration group, right, I still was building out Windows, Cisco routers, Cisco networks, a lot of Cisco products. And they do have a lot of other tools that do encryption, so I had to learn those tools. But I think initially when I started out there, they had me on a IPsec, like how to implement IPsec, how to implement PKI, how to get like hash and access control built out. So in a lab environment, they're, they basically have these solutions, these products, these tools already there, and then you're learning how to put it together, how to configure a router, how to configure a firewall, how to apply the firewall rules, how to you have two different networks, how to basically create the bidirectional rules. I think initially when I was there for the training, I started out with the networking kind of concepts and then building out networks and then more of like the ComSec electronic warfare systems that the government uses. But it was very technical towards Linux and Windows, not just Windows. We see in the corporate America is a lot of Windows. And when you go back, when you step back into, when I step back into my thinking of what I did with the DoD, we did a lot more Linux work compared to Windows. But progressively, right when I left, it was more Windows. And then at the same time, you saw even though I'm building out this little small network, applying policies and protocols to this vehicle integration project, there was another team that will come in there and run their testing, their pen tests. So I had to build out a really secure network, but at the same time, I was learning from the other team, from the pen testing team, that maybe I didn't build it out correctly, or what these are flaws. This is what I could have done better in the long run. So at a high level, there's a lot of technical hands-on work that I had to apply and learn really quickly. And then at the same time, I there was a team that was breaking it down and saying, okay, this is not that good. We exploited your system. So it was that mentality, right? Very hands-on, very realistic approach to learning before I actually went and started working on a team that was part of this team.
Yeah,
Part
and then you transition into the corporate world, and then you transition to management and leading teams. So walk me through that. Again,
Mhm.
it's a whole different skill set associated with managing a
Yeah,
team and be able to now you're under a very different set of rules too from a corporate perspective.
yeah. So right after I decided I'm going to leave the DoD, the Department of Defense, I ended up getting a role out in New Jersey, more consulting, more related to testing out the security equipment. So my first role when I came back to New Jersey from DC, I worked for a lab called Myricom. They're a big lab out in New Jersey that does a lot more device testing for basically for the industry. So I was there in a consulting role because I was looking to get back into this, move back into the area. I ended up landing a role with the finance world in Depository Trust Clearing Corporation in New Jersey, doing a lot more consulting work, but as a information security engineer, building out networks and applying a lot of these tools that I already and knowledge that I had from the DoD, how to build out networks to basically a finance, a corporate America job. So initially when I started working there, it wasn't just my hands-on approach. I had to start putting documentation together, proposals, and understanding what some of the corporate American culture was in order to start applying what I consider like my hands-on experience, but also managing people and managing a project. And that's where I started my first role right out of when I came back with the Depository Trust Clearing Corporation. I started dapping into cloud security and AWS specifically. I ended up leaving the Depository Trust Clearing Corporation for a senior information security manager role out in New York with a company called Convergex. So in Convergex, it wasn't just hands-on. I was running through what I consider the CISO management, upper management, and organizing certain activities also, and learning what current kind of security risks are out there, specifically in finance, because I wasn't exposed to that previously. And then applying controls and technologies that are necessary. So I was running through the whole process of, all right, we have this new tool that's coming on the market. It's great. It's going to help us secure this part of the network, or it's going to improve our DLP. So I was dealing with a lot of Palo Alto products, Proofpoint, and then also at the same time, even though we were a small group of people, it's about like 6 of us in a team, probably four people reporting to me, and I was reporting directly to the Chief Information Security Officer at the time, and it wasn't just hands-on. I was designing, right, implementing at the same time. I'm trying to make sure that the whole operation is working, but at the same time mentoring these younger engineers on the team, trying to get them to understand what I'm doing and how I did it and how I learned it in order for them to kind of help me support overall security engineering, security functions of the company.
Danny, what was your management style?
So that's when I started around 2016. I started teaching at PH University. So that's when I first started getting my role. I was about a year and a half into my role at Convergex, and then I started teaching here. So I like to keep it very small and be very hands-on, but also lead towards a mentorship perspective. I want them to learn very hands-on approach, but also apply the role of how to manage or become the manager in the future. I wasn't really strict with them. I gave them week-to-week projects, and then every Friday we had a deadline and we had a one-on-one, and we would basically sit down and say, okay, you're working on deploying a simple Proofpoint DLP. We are going to deploy, let's say, this much, a large, let's say all the detection measures by Friday, and we have, for example, another like 5,000 to go. So what is our long-term project? So I would make them do a project outline, start thinking in that mentality of project management. At the same time, like I would have one of the other engineers work on, like, for example, a semantic endpoint. And for example, we have an endpoint deployment. So we're updating the endpoint security, Microsoft semantic endpoint, and have them have him learn the process of updating it, going from, for example, building out a kind of testing environment where we're going to pretty much start testing it out, but not mess around with the live network yet, And then also, obviously, we have agent deployment, so I'll have him map out an agent deployment, how long it's going to take us, when can we do this. And that will support me as a manager also to report to the chief security officer with timelines on how we can kind of get this project at the fleeting.
Danny, that was new to you. You had to manage upwards, and then you had to manage downwards.
Yeah.
And sometimes you face difficult conversation both sides, meaning that sometimes you have to deal with uncomfortable conversations, right? So you other people not performing, not putting things, getting to things on time. Maybe the performance is not something that your expectations they don't meet. And then on the CISO, on reporting to the CISO, they have to report to their management. And so they have the timelines, and they're under a lot of stress because they see larger, maybe risk and compliance and governance for the entire organization. So you are just a silo of that. Talk to me about how you dealt with some of those conversations, and maybe people remember stories. Maybe tell us some concrete stories without divulging the details of maybe things you come across, maybe a situation where you had to overcome, and then maybe like real life challenges.
Yeah. Some of the challenges I was starting to learn out regulations and all these compliance requirements when I got to Convergex, which was interesting because I never dealt with like somebody watching over me. And this was the first role where I was reporting up to a chief information security officer that had his own plan and his own mentality of what was necessary to get basically the bank or this finance company secure. So I think one of the first issues I ran into was dealing with business guys, right? The shareholders in a way, which the chief information security officer was very technical also. He knew my mentality, but when it went up past his position, I had to bring it down slate to speak this business and shareholder mindset, using terminologies that were a little less advanced and technical aspects. So some of the challenges there were I would have to rely on my guys to do the work, right, and kind of time manage them, make sure that they're working on what is necessary to fix the network or improve it, right, from a monitoring, attack mitigation, or response perspective. Because even though I'm doing security engineering, the mentality was, oh, we have to protect this network, and we have to respond and mitigate any threats against our network. So I was wearing multiple hats at the same time. Like I was trying to be technical 50% of the time, managing the team, and at the same time, I was an engineer on the team also that was responding to some of the threats and also responding to some of these and being part of these meetings that were had to respond to. But the shareholders will come back and saying, okay, this bank ABCD got compromised last week with ransomware. What do we have into place to protect us from ransomware? So it was having these conversations that were a bit challenging because I never really was exposed to that, and also providing them how secure our network is and what we plan on doing and making it some more secure. At the same time, bring it up to their level of understanding that we're not going to have any kind of, if we do get hit with ransomware, we have multiple kind of email filtering in place. We have web filtering, so we can probably detect from a proxy perspective, C2. Right. So talking this language was very different because I'm very good at talking very technical, but bringing it down a slate was one of my kind of harder things to do.
Yeah, and it's something you had to learn on a job to be able to translate
I had to learn on the fly. Yeah.
And I'm sure you had to.
I had a very supportive information security, chief information security officer, because he was my chief information security officer at the Proprietary Trust Clear Corporation. So he's the one who brought me on to that role to be the senior manager under him at Convergex. Unfortunately, Convergex also got bought out by another company, and 3 years later we got laid off. But that's just I guess the realm of corporate America.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a job security is a thing of the past, and then there's also these global micro and macro forces that are at play everywhere.
Yeah.
So then you venture into a very stressful area of cybersecurity, which is incident response. And if I can think about one area which is very challenging, is I would say is that due to multiple factors. But I'll let you maybe describe that, maybe what your role was, what your responsibilities were, and what your experience was overall.
Yeah. So I stayed in a role of management for roughly 5 years, I'm going to say. And then I always wanted to step back and enjoy the whole attack perspective of kind of responding to attacks and being an instant responder. So I was offered an opportunity with another financial bank basically to do incident response and being a global incident responser, not just a local guy. This is global, like a massive network. So even though I was an individual contributor to analysis and technical response, I was the lead on a team that have junior and senior guys come up to me for knowledge, for technical knowledge. So you're like that point of escalation. That's where it became this mindset where, hey, I have to run my day-to-day incident response analysis all the way from start to finish. But at the same time, as a lead, I have guys that are coming to me saying, hey, I'm working on this incident. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. I looked at Windows logs. I looked at network logs. I looked at endpoint logs, and I still can't figure out how they got in or how they ended up downloading a virus. So branching off the previous management of my previous skill of managing an employee, but also managing a team came into play here because as a lead, I was also being a manager in a way, but more of a technical manager. So the role is 100% technical, very hands-on. I do report up to a director, right? But at the same time, the director is technical. So all the work I'm doing is very hands-on, nonstop. You're getting over 1 million hits a day globally, and you're working on a 24/7 operation, 365 days a year. There's nonstop alerts coming in, and the teams in the U.S. were it's a team. There's enough people to mitigate and respond, right? But there's obviously a process in place. There's tools in place, all right? There's, as me being a previous manager coming into this role, doing incident response, I already had the security engineering aspect and managing a team, but now applying my hands-on technical knowledge from years ago when I first started learning security, now back into a role where I can go into the firewall and configure and make sure the rule doesn't box certain IPs, go into the endpoint and remove a virus. Also work with the Windows team and gain a system reimage. Go into a web server and stopping a DDoS attack, blocking an IP, blocking some protocols. So these are things that I was doing in my start of my career, and I'm now doing it now in the last 5 years, right, doing incident response. It's a lot more fast paced. You're applying your knowledge at a faster rate, and you're thinking on your feet. You're making that basically logical decision right away based on security events that can basically affect the whole business. As a global business, you're protecting not just the data, but you're protecting basically the reputation of a company.
Yeah. Did you ever, Danny, ever think about, wow, how far have I come from the break fix of Circuit City to
Yeah.
managing the incident response for a global network, global organization with much higher stakes. Did you ever, every once in a while, stop and think, "Wow, I've come a long way"?
Yeah. There'll be multiple occasions where I'll be dealing with an incident, and I would try to think of this, look at myself as where I've gotten to based on just the steps I took to respond and then mitigate a threat. In my back of my mind, I always thought about if I didn't learn how to secure a network, or I didn't learn Windows, or I didn't learn Linux back in the day, how would I even thought about responding to this threat or even analyzing it at that level?
Yeah,
So it was, I think it was just the impact of the technical aspect throughout my career that kind of sometimes even there's a process in place how to respond to a certain incident, but my personal process, my personal technical skills from learning from back in the day would basically just hit me like, oh wow, you remember this, like it would click back to you, and I would say, wow, I have gotten so far to this point where now I'm like protecting a corporation from an outside threat, at the same time, from a technical aspect, you're protecting it, but from a non-technical layer, you're at the same time still reporting these incidents and discussing these incidents with the shareholders. At the same time, also post analysis of post incident, right? But you're putting out a plan, right? How to protect this in the future, and then handle this, right, from a response technique. But it was all my previous experience that I had already that kind of gave me these opportunities, gave me the, what I would say, the head start or the upper end to not just following the standard process of in place, but also applying my own process of knowledge that I had learned years ago when I started my career.
yeah. And Danny, from your perspective, what do you see are the emerging threats currently in cyber, and where things are going? Because again, you were hands-on experience. You've seen the evolution of these threats throughout the several years, and then maybe as part of that question, the second part of it would be, what, as defenders, what type of innovation do you see that can potentially mitigate some of these threats and allow us to better secure organizations?
Yes, we dealt with a lot of email threats. It's one of the areas where your front door is open from emails, right? Email is one of the areas where
Danny,
we,
how's it possible? We've been using emails for so many years. How is it possible
right,
we're
we try to
still?
figure out how to secure it correctly.
Yeah, it's amazing that we talk about attack vector has been around for so long.
Yeah,
Yet
it's just
you'd
the
think
ability. Uh, I think it's just the ability of the bad guy learning how to mask those emails to look nice and beautiful, basically, to having that one employee inside the company just click on it when they receive it. And it's bypassing all these security measures, right? Because all our tools can only do so much, right? It can only, if there's an email, I mean, with a URL in it, yes, it'll block that URL, right? But if you take that URL and now embed that URL into a file, for example, a PDF file, and the PDF file itself is clean, right? But it just takes that one person to open that PDF, click on that link or that beautiful picture in that attachment, right? Now that's where you're being exploited from. A lot of our tools are really great at stopping files that are malicious and URLs in the body of the email. But once you add a layer of what I call disguise in that email, it's opening the door for ransomware. It's opening the door for malicious drive-by installers, all right, credential validation attacks. Right, this is where I think a lot of especially the finance world, is being affected because a lot of them are moving to Office 365. A lot of them are in the cloud. So just masking a nice fake Office 365 email from your inside IT department and making an internal employee just click on it, right? When we look at the OSA model, right, there's multiple layers there, but they never include the human factor, right, the human layer, right? It's the number one problem that companies are, I think, are not putting enough education, which I call education awareness training. I think that's where a lot of companies are lacking. They have very great security, they have a lot of money, but when it comes to educating employees, I think it's one of the last things they do. As a new hire, a lot of companies you'll go through click training, right? They'll send you for this nice video, but most people can bypass that training. Are they really understanding what and how to protect our company from an employee perspective, right? And
and Danny, I was not to cut you off, but I was just saying to add to what you mentioned, which is very true. On top of the issues with the emails is the fact that email deliverability is critical to the organization. That's how you conduct business, right? Everything's done through email, all the meetings and schedule everything. It's very tough to block it or have certain controls over it because God knows if email doesn't get to the destination, it is a false positive. Things can get quite ugly for IT. So in your perspective, we mentioned email is one area. What other attack vectors have you seen, and potentially what innovation in the space have you seen that can help us mitigate that stuff? And we all agree that the issue is quite a bit is between the keyboard and the chair, right?
Yep. Besides, obviously, we don't. I meant like by email, but like the phishing attacks. There's obviously the perspective of outside sponsored attacks, also government sponsored attacks, which are a big portion of a lot of the financial cyber attacks that we see. Right. When we look at history, the first initial hacker, right, was there to make a name for himself. Right now, it's what we see in the last 20 years. It's about financial gain. So they're trying to steal money, or they're trying to make money off of you. What we see also is the method of how can they compromise either a network, right, or get that confidential data and then be able to sell it, right, which is another element to making money. So that's where I'm seeing a large kind of push for these outside perspectives, the outside criminal networks, and to do this, right? They're trying to make money somehow and resell their information.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, do you see from an innovation perspective? Do you see any tools, any methods or frameworks that will allow defenders to be more effective into defending the organization?
Like tools right now, besides the APTs, we're obviously in the data breaches, and then the phishing and the insider threats. There's quite a few different tools. I think your question was based on what tools were. That what you asked?
Yeah, tools and methodologies or frameworks, or overall, what you've seen in terms of innovation. It doesn't have to be tools, but innovation in terms of, because again, the adversaries are moving forward, the defenders are moving forward. What do you see that potentially can maybe offset some of that? Because it seems to be like a fine balance. Sometimes we are ahead, sometimes they're ahead. What do you find it as moving the needles on the way we protect organizations?
There's, besides your standard antivirus software and your firewalls, right? I think what we're seeing is a lot more advanced IDS and IPS EDR solutions, endpoint detection and response tools. I think there's a need for more kind of correlation of logs where we need some kind of tool that's going to take what Splunk does, right? Splunk does a correlation, right? It takes a lot of logs, but it doesn't really respond, right? How do we automate some of this fashion to respond to a threat or respond to something that's happening on a network, right? If there's linear movement on a network, and we know based on the Windows logs and the network logs and the endpoint logs that something fishy is going on. How do we protect or how do we respond, right? So maybe what I'm mentioning is like the instant response platforms. We don't really see too many of those besides some EDR solutions now on the market, but I think we need some kind of platform that's going to be what we consider an instant response platform. It's going to take all these different logs and different behaviors, anomalies, and now start basically taking action more accurately. Obviously, in the finance world, like if you block an email, like you're blocking potentially real emails, but obviously if you go do your further analysis in that email, the header, if it's proof that we know who the real domain is, and then that's going to eliminate you blocking potentially a real business email.
Right.
First, obviously, what I mentioned was the security kind of awareness training. One of the things that at teaching, I teach my students, but in the real world, in corporate America, there's no platforms out there. There's not really like the cybersecurity education for employees, right? HR will give you some training, that's really it. But if you push out some of these platforms to the employees that work in finance, marketing, let them run through a standard cybersecurity education and understanding what they are. So I think you're combining a lot of more of the human factor with your security incident management tools, plus with a response platform. That's where I think we need to start combining this stuff and correlating the data and correlating of the logs in a lot more in an automation fashion.
Yeah. And I agree. It takes a village. It takes the entire organization to defend
Correct.
itself. It's not just the CISO or the team. It has to come from the entire organization. Listen, Danny, it's been a real pleasure. I want to, before we part ways, let me ask you this. Where do you go from here? What's your goal? You've come a long way. You progressed really nice. It's amazing to see somebody who put in the effort to formal education, had the hands-on experience, management experience, teaching, which is amazing. I think it's your way to give back for all the knowledge you have from corporate America, as well as some of the DoD experience, which is great. So where do you go from there? What's your ideal position? Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
Right now, I enjoy being technical, very hands-on. I'm reaching for that opportunity where I'm going to go back into managerial, like being maybe a manager or a director, but also not eliminate my hands-on capabilities. I think one of the things that with CISOs and being a manager and a director, specifically information security or cybersecurity or security engineering, you need a technical manager. Like you need the manager to understand how I ran through step A, B, to Z to apply that knowledge. But when I reach out to CISOs, hey, I need approval to block this domain or block this IP address. And it's related to a vendor that we do business with, right? So that mentality is, okay, instead of them asking me the questions, they can probably make the judgmental decision on technical aspects. So being in a role where I see myself is getting into that role where if somebody reaches out to me, I already have the knowledge of a Russian IP or a Chinese sponsored attack, right? Or I know what ransomware is. I know what Emotet is, right? Instead of asking the questions, hey guys, can you explain me what Emotet is or how this Cisco router got compromised or what an IP is? What I'm seeing is a lot of roles that are above the normal technical roles. Simplicity in cybersecurity, the CISOs are not like some of the managers are not as technical as what they should be. And I think me as being very technical and reaching up to that step, it'll combine both of the aspects, right? I can make a decision on blocking an IP or mitigating an attack. At the same time, I can manage a team, and from regulatory compliance perspective and reporting up to the shareholders, but also having the more knowledge of technical and explain to them, oh, we just got compromised and this is how it happened, ABCD. Obviously, I have a team that's mitigating the threat right now, but I already have the technical knowledge to explain to them what's happening. I think that's where there's a lack of. When I worked with the DoD, I also dealt with lawyers. And I still deal with lawyers now. What I'm seeing a lot of lawyers is they're not what I consider buzzword compliant. But they are buzzword compliant, but they're not technical enough to understand certain things that happened. So they're good at hiding behind the cover in a way of a cyber attack and covering for the company. But realistically, there was maybe a lack of a simple technical tools on that network in order for it to be secure. There was maybe a budget cut that affected it, right? What I'm currently going through is the same perspective, right? We're a part of a team. There's massive layoffs happening right now across a lot of industries, but they're laying off the people that protect the companies, that protect the people, that protect the elements of the data. So in order to stop back and say, okay, guys, we can't lay off half of our cybersecurity team and engineering team. How are we going to protect the bank? How are we going to protect our company? I think that mindset is also necessary now, what's happening in the industry. Having technical knowledge and saying, okay, we're losing manpower, but we have so many tools that we need to manage. How can we manage it? And being at that director level, I think having that concept of understanding helps in the long run for protecting your data, protecting your company from a cybersecurity kind of perspective.
And Danny, what's the easiest way for people to reach out to you for consultation, just to follow up on this conversation, whatever the case may be? What's the easiest way?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Danny Dimoski. You can email me also, ddemoski@pace.edu. You personally just reach out to me on my LinkedIn is really probably the easiest, the best way, because I have pretty much every connecting there. It's one of my connectors to my whole real kind of professional aspect. But also you can reach out to me via email at ddemoski@pace.edu. It's probably the best. Also another option.
Fantastic. Danny, thank you very, very much for joining me today. Thanks for all who joined us today as well.
Okay.
And until next time, stay safe online as well as offline, and I'll see you in the next episode.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.